Get out, this is my community, the HOA. Her voice sliced through the crisp morning air like a knife. Karen, though she swore her name was Pierce, chairwoman of Riverside Meadows, was screaming at me like I had just trespassed on a kingdom she built with her bare hands. I was standing on land my uncle left me 3 weeks ago. The same dirt driveway where I spent every childhood summer racing barefoot through the fields, catching lightning bugs at dusk, listening to the creek babble behind the cabin. This was supposed to be a homecoming, a quiet return to a place that shaped who I am. But here was this woman, hair pulled into a severe bun, clipboard clutched like a weapon, acting like I was the intruder. Her hands shook with rage, her fake badge glinting in the sunlight. Something about her desperation felt wrong, like she wasn't just protecting property values, but hiding something much bigger. Have you ever had someone act like they owned your family's land? That's the moment I knew my uncle's death and my inheritance weren't the end of a story. They were the start of one. Driving up from California, I'd been flooded with memories. Uncle teaching me how to find the old stone boundary markers. Mrs. from the yellow house waving cookies at us from her kitchen window. That massive oak tree with the rope swing I nearly broke my arm on when I was 8. The pine-sweet air carried me back in time, right until I saw them. 3 black SUVs blocking my driveway, amber strobes flashing, men stringing up yellow tape like they were preparing for a crime scene. Diesel fumes mixed with my morning coffee, and my stomach turned cold. This wasn't neighbors bickering over lawn height. This was tactical, military precision, radios crackling, boots crunching on gravel. A folding table slammed down in the dirt, equipment spread out like they were staging an operation. And right in the center of it all, her. She stepped out of the lead SUV like a federal agent, voice sharp and professional. "Sir, I'm Pierce. This property has been flagged for immediate safety inspection due to multiple code violations and environmental hazards." Her tone wasn't a request, it was a verdict. Behind her, a man named vest-labeled Community Safety moved like a soldier securing the perimeter. The way he barked, "Perimeter secured, ma'am," made my skin crawl. I stood there frozen, coffee mug halfway to my mouth, wondering what kind of neighborhood inspection team operated like a SWAT raid. She held out papers with county letterheads, lists of violations, roof damage, unpermitted modifications, electrical hazards. 17 violations, she said. 17. But the way she recited them, it sounded rehearsed like a script. And here what made my blood run cold. She knew details about Uncle's cabin that nobody should know, the private workshop in the basement, repairs you couldn't see from the road, things only family ever talked about. How did she know that? Standing there, I felt like I'd walked onto a stage where everyone else knew their lines but me. As they packed up, I caught's voice on the radio. "Base, target engaged, subject appears compliant, timeline accelerated, Uncle's files secured." Files timeline secured. My stomach dropped. They weren't here for code violations. They had been watching long before I arrived. That night, a packet slid under my cabin door like some legal ambush. 3 pages of violations. Photos taken inside the property, angles only possible if someone had already broken in. Attached was a deadline. 30 days to pay $47,000 in remediation fees or lose the property. $47,000 for a cabin that had stood strong my entire childhood. The next morning called me. Her voice was dripping with false sympathy. "Mr. Phillips, I understand your situation. The HOA wants to help. Pay the remediation and this can all go away." Something in her tone made me pause. It was too polished, too smooth. So I drove to the county office. Spent the whole afternoon flipping through dusty records, cross-checking permits. And you know what I found? Nothing. No HOA charter, no inspection requests, no legitimate violations on file. When I called her back and told her, silence filled the line. Long, heavy. Then her voice sharpened, steel replacing sympathy. "Mr. Phillips, you're making serious accusations without understanding the legal complexities involved." That's when I realized I wasn't up against a cranky neighbor. I was up against an operation. and I had just become the one person standing in their way. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the gate creaking in the wind, that familiar rusted hinge whining like it always had when Uncle swung it open after chores. But this time, the sound didn't bring comfort. It felt like a warning. I sat on the cabin porch, boots dusty from the driveway, staring at that packet of so-called violations. 3 pages stapled neat, stamped with county seals that looked real enough to fool anyone at first glance. Roof instability, foundation damage, environmental hazards. Photos attached, grainy, angled, invasive. But the thing that gnawed at me most wasn't the list. It was the angles, the basement, the workshop, places only family had ever been. Someone had been inside. I flipped through Uncle's old papers looking for answers. The man kept everything. Bills folded into envelopes, receipts for lumber, faded maps with his careful handwriting scribbled across the edges. And then, buried under a stack of old property tax records, I found a folder. In his neat block letters, Neighborhood Watch. My breath caught. Inside, photos. Meeting with men in tailored suits behind the diner parking lot. License plate numbers scrawled in pen on napkins. Fake inspection notices sent to other residents. Handwritten notes about intimidation tactics. Page after page. Uncle hadn't just lived here quietly, he'd been investigating something. The more I read, the more I realized he'd been documenting the same people who were now targeting me. One note stopped me cold. Residents paying thousands for improvements that never happen, patterns of fear, fake violations. Another must protect Brandon. My throat tightened at the sight of my name in his handwriting. What had he uncovered that made him fear for me? And then I saw it, a business card tucked between the papers. Riverside Development Corporation, a meeting scheduled for the week after Uncle died, a meeting he never made. The back of the card had his handwriting again. Property acquisition timeline, community destabilization phase, legal pressure points. I froze. This wasn't about lawn heights or mailbox colors. This was about land. And if Uncle was right, the land under my feet was worth far more than anyone realized. The next day, orange survey stakes appeared like weeds overnight, hammered into the soil with neon tags that read, property assessment, development planning. But the lines stretched far beyond my cabin, past where I thought my boundaries ended, into neighbors' yards, into cul-de-sacs where children rode their bikes. Standing in the dirt, I watched block my driveway again, vest puffed with fake authority. He spoke in that clipped military tone. Sir, property is under assessment review. Please limit access during evaluation period. I stared at him. This wasn't a security officer. He had no badge, no legal weight, just a man playing soldier on my land. That's when Sandra Williams approached. My neighbor, accountant, soft-spoken, always waved politely when we were kids. Her face was pale, hands trembling as she clutched a folder to her chest. Brandon, can we talk privately? I think I've made a terrible mistake. We walked a few steps away, gravel crunching underfoot, and her words spilled out in a rush. Asked me to track neighborhood finances, said it was community service. I thought I was helping, but I gave her everything, income records, mortgage information, who was behind on payments. I didn't know she was using it to target people. The guilt in her eyes made my stomach knot. Sandra had unknowingly armed with the most dangerous weapon, knowledge of who could fight back and who couldn't. She told me it was about property values, Sandra whispered, voice breaking. But now I realize it was a hit list. Her words hung heavy in the air. I thought back to Uncle's notes, to his urgency, to his warning scrawled across the map. Brandon owns more than he knows. The stakes in the ground weren't just for intimidation. They were for acquisition. Sandra's hands shook as she pushed the folder into mine. Your uncle asked me to help with deed research. He said the records didn't add up, that you inherited more than just the cabin. I opened the folder and felt my pulse spike. Legal descriptions, parcel maps, and at the bottom, bold and clear, 137 acres. Not one lot, not a cabin, but nearly the entire neighborhood. The ground beneath dozens of families. the ground beneath's entire plan. No wonder she wanted me gone. Because if this was true, if Uncle was right, then I wasn't just a resident. I was the landlord of Riverside Meadows. You ever had that moment when your world tilts sideways and you realize you've been living with only half the truth? That's what it felt like, holding those deed papers in my hands. 137 acres. I sat at Uncle's old workbench that night, the smell of sawdust still clinging to the walls, staring at the maps he'd drawn. My hands shook as I traced the lines he marked in red ink. They stretched across cul-de-sacs, beneath backyards, under homes where kids played basketball in their driveways. It wasn't just a cabin I inherited. It was the foundation of this entire community. But if that was true, then everyone here, the neighbors, the families, even Mrs. with her cookies, they were all living on my land without ever knowing it. The sound of the phone startled me, the old landline ringing sharp against the silence. I picked up. "Mr. Phillips," his voice came through, smooth as glass, but with that undertone of irritation she could never quite hide. "We need to finalize your remediation plan. If you fail to comply, the county will be forced to intervene." I almost laughed. "Funny, I was just at the county office. They don't seem to know who you are." For the first time, her mask cracked. The silence stretched. When she finally spoke, her voice was hard, clipped. "You're making serious accusations, dangerous ones. I strongly suggest you reconsider your tone." That was the moment I knew she was rattled. The next morning, I drove into town and met Jake Miller, my old college friend who now worked at the sheriff's department. We sat in a diner booth, the kind with cracked red vinyl seats, while the smell of burnt coffee and bacon grease hung in the air. I slid the deed papers across the table. "Jake, I need you to check this, and while you're at it, run background checks on two people, Pierce and—" He scanned the pages, frowning. "Brandon, if these deeds are legitimate, half this neighborhood is on your land, but I'll dig deeper." 2 days later, Jake called me back with results that made my blood run cold. Assault conviction, lost his security license years ago, no authority to act as any kind of officer. And I asked, gripping the phone. She's been fired from multiple management jobs. Every time, same story, exceeded authority, power trips, fabricated rules. No criminal record, but she's got a pattern. I rubbed my forehead, trying to process it. What about Riverside Development Corporation? Jake sighed. That's the big one, incorporated 2 years ago. They've been quietly buying land all over the county for a massive mixed-use project. But your 137 acres, that's the centerpiece. Without it, they can't move forward. I sank back in my chair, the weight of it hitting me. They weren't just harassing me. They needed me out of the way. That night showed up at my driveway again. Only this time I didn't back down. I said, stepping close enough to see the sweat on his brow, "I know about your record. I know you don't have the authority to be here." His eyes flickered. For the first time, he didn't bark orders. He looked ashamed. "I made mistakes," he muttered, voice low. "Lost everything. She gave me a second chance, a place to stay, a job, said I could help the community, made me feel like I mattered again." There it was, the hook she'd used on him. Vulnerability wrapped in promises. "But look around you," I said, pointing at the stakes littering the ground like gravestones. "Does this look like helping a community or destroying it?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Not yet. The following evening called a community meeting in the town hall. The room filled with worried families, the air thick with unease. Folding chairs scraped against the floor, murmurs rippled like waves, and children clung to their parents' legs. Stood at the front, clipboard in hand, voice ringing with authority. "We have an outsider threatening our community. Brandon Phillips inherited a cabin, but now he challenges our rules, jeopardizes property values, and destabilizes the place we've built together." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others frowning. And then the whispers started. Posts had already appeared on the message boards, claims that I had violent tendencies, that I planned to subdivide the land for commercial use. Lies, but crafted with such detail they sounded almost believable. I stood up, my pulse pounding in my ears. Everything she's told you is fake. There is no legitimate HOA here. The violations, the documents, the threats, they're manufactured. She's working with a development company that wants this land. But my words barely had time to land before voices rose in anger. We've lived here peacefully for years, someone shouted. Why are you trying to destroy our community? Another demanded. The fear in their eyes wasn't aimed at, it was aimed at me. And in that moment, I realized she'd done it. She turned my own neighbors against me. But she didn't know I had something she didn't expect. Uncle's files, and a growing suspicion that his sudden death wasn't just bad luck. Ever notice how silence can feel louder than shouting? That's what the community hall sounded like after my words. 100 people staring, whispering, shuffling in their seats, but not a soul ready to believe me. Didn't even look at me as she paced the front of the room, every step calculated. Her voice rolled out like a practiced sermon. Brandon Phillips is not one of us. He inherited a shack, and now he threatens everything we've built, our homes, our families, our property values. The room buzzed with fear, not reason. The lies she'd planted online had already taken root. I could feel them judging me like I was the outsider, the enemy. And then out of the corner of my eye I saw he wasn't nodding along this time. His jaw was tight, eyes shifting between me and her. The soldier mask was slipping. After the meeting, I stepped outside into the cool night air. The cicadas buzzed loud, and the gravel crunched under boots as followed me out. Brandon, he said, his voice lower now, almost hesitant. We need to talk. We walked toward the edge of the lot, away from the crowd. He rubbed his hands together like a man fighting himself. She's been planning this for months, he admitted. Ever since your uncle died, told me he was stubborn, wouldn't cooperate with development plans. I drove her to his cabin the week before he passed. They argued. She was furious. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. What do you mean argued? I asked. They fought about property rights. She wanted him to sign over certain parcels. He refused. She said he was an obstacle, and a week later he was dead. The night suddenly felt colder. Uncle healthy, active, strong, gone in an instant from a so-called heart attack. I stared at my throat dry. You think she had something to do with it? His voice cracked. Brandon, I think your uncle was murdered. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. My mind spun, replaying every note in Uncle's folder. The urgency, the torn-off page about property ownership, his last entry, must protect Brandon. And now was standing here, guilt pouring off him in waves. I didn't know, he stammered. She made it sound like community service, said we were protecting property values, keeping things safe. But the more I see, the more I realize. His voice trailed off, heavy with shame. I swallowed hard, anger and fear mixing like poison. Why are you telling me this now? He looked down, kicking at the gravel. Because I can't keep doing this. I can't keep intimidating families who don't deserve it, and because I recorded her. My breath caught, what? His eyes flicked up, searching mine. I recorded her talking about your uncle. She said, some problems solve themselves if you wait. A week later was gone. I didn't understand then, I do now. The world tilted under me. A recording, proof. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. My uncle hadn't just been harassed, he'd been silenced. The next day, Jake met me at the cabin. He set a thick file down on the table, his expression grim. County records back up what's suspected, Jake said. You didn't just inherit the cabin. You inherited all 137 acres, including the ground under most of the neighborhood homes. The original developer defaulted on a lease years ago. Ownership reverted back to your uncle. The residents never knew. I stared at the papers, the reality hitting like a freight train. Every home, every yard, every street corner, they all sat on land I now legally owned. Jake leaned closer, voice low. Brandon, that's why Riverside Development wants this so badly. They can't move forward without you, and that means they'll stop at nothing. I nodded slowly, my mind racing. Had been right about one thing, I was a threat, but not to the community, to her plan. That night I sat on the porch with a lantern, the old boards creaking under my chair, listening to the creak. The sound that once brought peace now carried a weight. Uncle had fought to protect this place. He'd died resisting them, and now it was on me. I thought about Sandra, her hands shaking as she confessed. About torn between gratitude and guilt. About my neighbors, manipulated into fearing me instead of the real predator. The question pressed heavy on my chest. How far was willing to go to finish what she started with my uncle? You ever notice how a single decision can feel like stepping off a cliff? That's what it felt like after told me about the recording. For weeks, I'd been trying to prove was a fraud. Now I had something more dangerous, proof she might have killed my uncle. But proof doesn't mean safety. Proof means a target on your back. The next morning, I woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel. Another SUV. Another reminder that they were always watching. I pulled back the curtain just enough to see standing outside, hands shoved deep in his vest pockets, looking like a man who hadn't slept. When I opened the door, he didn't bark orders. He didn't block the entrance. He just said, "I need to show you something." We sat on the porch, the wood groaning under our weight. He pulled a small recorder from his pocket and pressed play. His voice crackled through the speaker, icy and impatient. Doesn't understand the bigger picture. Obstacles like him, sometimes they solve themselves if you're patient enough. Hearing it out loud made my stomach twist. My uncle reduced to an obstacle. She said this a week before he died, whispered, shame burning in his eyes. I thought it was just her venting. Now I know better. I leaned forward, my voice low. Why are you telling me this? You've been her enforcer for months. His hands trembled as he gripped the recorder. Because she saved me once. Found me living in my car behind the grocery store, gave me a place to stay, money, food. She made me feel like I mattered again. But lately, I don't recognize what she's asking me to do. He looked me in the eye for the first time. She made me believe I was protecting people, but all I've been doing is scaring families, intimidating neighbors who never signed up for any of this. The shame in his voice was raw, real. And in that moment, I saw not a thug in a vest, but a man trapped in its web just like everyone else. I said quietly, "You don't have to keep being her weapon." His shoulders slumped, the weight of months pressing down on him. If I walk away, I lose everything, the apartment, the money. I go back to being nobody. But if I stay, he trailed off, his voice cracking. If I stay, I keep becoming something I hate. The choice tore him apart. And I realized his story was that different from the neighbors. Had found their weaknesses and used them like levers, fear, money, reputation, whatever it took to control them. Later that afternoon, Sandra stopped by, clutching another folder. Her eyes darted nervously toward the road before she stepped inside. "Brandon," she whispered, setting the folder on the table. "Your uncle wanted you to have these deed documents, survey maps. According to this, your land covers 137 acres. Most of the neighborhood is sitting on it. The residents only own their houses. The land is yours." The words hit like thunder. It wasn't suspicion anymore, it was fact. I flipped through the documents, my pulse racing. Legal descriptions, parcel maps, dates going back to the 1800s. My family's name on every page. Sandra's voice trembled. "They don't know, Brandon. None of us did. We thought we owned our land. We thought we were safe." I sat back, trying to breathe through the storm in my chest. All this time hadn't just been trying to push me out of a cabin. She'd been trying to erase the truth of ownership itself. And now I understood why she'd gone to my uncle, why she'd needed him out of the way. The community meeting was the breaking point, called it to address rising tensions, but everyone knew it was about me. The hall buzzed with nervous families, whispers bouncing off the walls like echoes of fear. She stood at the front, polished and cold, painting me as a villain. "Brandon Phillips threatens our stability, our property values, our peace. He brings lawsuits, accusations, chaos." Her words landed like darts, and I felt eyes burning into me. Parents clutched their children. Older couples shook their heads, already convinced. When I stood, my voice shook. But not from fear, from anger, from truth. "She's lying to you. There is no HOA here. The county has no record of it. The documents she waves around, forged. And the land beneath your homes, the land she wants to sell to developers, that land is mine. My uncle left it to me. I can prove it. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. Smask didn't even crack. She just smiled that tight, rehearsed smile. Proof, she scoffed. What he has is confusion, old papers, misinterpretations. Don't let him frighten you with nonsense. But as she spoke, I saw in the back of the room, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. And for the first time, he didn't look like her soldier. He looked like a man ready to tell the truth. You ever see a mask slip right in front of a crowd? It doesn't happen all at once. First it's a twitch of the jaw, then a crack in the voice, until finally the whole collapses. That's what happened to that night. The community hall smelled faintly of coffee and dust, the kind of scent that clings to old linoleum floors. Folding chairs squeaked as neighbors leaned forward, waiting for her next line of attack. She'd been controlling the room with that same clipped authority, voice steady, hands gripping her clipboard like a judge's gavel. And then stood. For a long moment, no one moved. His shadow stretched across the floor under the harsh fluorescent lights. His voice came out rough but firm. No, I won't do this anymore. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. Parents glanced at one another. Someone coughed. She turned on him with that rehearsed smile plastered across her face. Sit down. You're disrupting the meeting. But his voice rose, stronger now. Disrupting? You've been lying to these people. You made me intimidate families who never did anything wrong. You told me it was for community safety, but it was for you, for your deal with Riverside Development. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. For the first time, the room wasn't looking at me. They were looking at her. Her lips tightened. You don't know what you're talking about. But he didn't back down. His hands shook, but his words cut like glass. I know enough. I know you called an obstacle. I know you said some problems solved themselves. And I know he was dead a week later. The gasp that ran through the crowd was like a wave breaking against the shore. Her smile faltered. She opened her mouth to speak, but the sound never came. I stood, sliding a folder across the table so everyone could see. Maps, deeds, documents with county seals. My uncle left me 137 acres. This land isn't yours, it's mine, and it always has been. The room shifted uneasily. People craned their necks to look at the papers. Whispers hissed like static. She slammed her clipboard down, voice sharp enough to sting. He's twisting history. These are outdated records. You all own your land fair and square. But the tremor in her tone gave her away. Sandra stepped forward then, her voice quiet but steady. No, he's telling the truth. I've seen the documents too. I helped research the deeds. We've been living on leased land without even knowing it. The effect was immediate. Fear, betrayal, families looking at each other with wide eyes, mothers pulling children closer, elderly couples whispering frantically about mortgages, investments, security. The hall buzzed with rising panic until Mrs. Frail, silver-haired, the woman who'd once handed me cookies through a screen door, stood and raised her voice. We trusted you, and you used us. Her words landed heavier than any legal document could. His composure cracked, her face flushing red. You don't understand. Without me, this community would collapse. Your property values would crash. Crime would skyrocket. I kept you safe. But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. You could feel the tide turning, like water pulling away from shore before a storm surge. I pulled out the last card I had. She forged violation notices. She staged inspections. She intimidated anyone who pushed back, and she's been meeting with developers to sell this community out from under you. I held up's recorder, and I have her voice on tape. The sound of the recorder clicking on echoed in the hall. Its words spilled out, cold and damning. Doesn't understand the bigger picture. Obstacles like him, sometimes they solve themselves if you're patient enough. The room froze. You could have heard a pin drop. When the recording ended, every eye turned to her. For the first time since I'd come home, didn't look powerful. She looked cornered. Her voice cracked as she hissed, You're all fools. You think you can manage without me? This place will rot without my leadership. But stepped forward, his voice steady now, no longer hers to command. No, this community will heal without you. The spell she'd cast over everyone, the fear she'd wrapped around their throats, it snapped in that moment. And in the silence that followed, I realized something. She wasn't just losing control. She was unraveling. Ever seen someone lose everything in real time? It doesn't happen quietly. It happens like glass shattering, sudden, jagged, impossible to look away from. That's what happened to in that room. The hall buzzed with whispers, children tugging at parents' sleeves, people shifting uncomfortably in their folding chairs. The recording still echoed in their heads. Obstacles solved themselves. For a second she just stood there, red-faced, clipboard trembling in her hands, then the smile vanished. You ungrateful fools, she snapped, her voice ricocheting off the walls. I sacrificed everything for this community, my time, my energy, my life, and this is how you repay me, by siding with some nobody who inherited dirt. Gasps, murmurs. A father pulled his daughter close, eyes wide with disbelief. I didn't move, just watched. This wasn't a leader defending herself. This was a mask ripped off, exposing the raw fury beneath. You think peace just happens, she barked, pointing her clipboard at the crowd like a weapon. You think safety is free? Without me, your property values would collapse. Crime would consume your streets. I am the reason this place exists. Her voice cracked, rising higher, trembling with rage. Mrs. Frail voice cut through like a knife. We never asked you for any of this. We just wanted to live quietly. The hall went still. You could feel the weight of it. One sentence, simple and devastating. His face twisted, and something inside her snapped. You don't understand, she screamed, pounding the clipboard on the table. Papers flew like confetti. Your precious was going to ruin everything until I convinced him otherwise. The words hung in the air, heavy as stone, and then the gasps came. Did she just admit it? Sandra covered her mouth with both hands. A man in the back cursed under his breath. Stepped forward, his voice hard. Say it again, tell them what you did to. Her eyes darted wild now. He was stubborn, he wouldn't listen, he was in the way. Some problems need solutions. The last thread of her composure snapped, and suddenly she was packing, shouting, gesturing wildly. You people have no idea what I've done for you, the deals I've made, the sacrifices. Riverside needed me. The developers trusted me. I built this. And there it was, the full confession, spilling out in manic bursts. The truth she'd hidden under polished speeches and forged papers. Phones came up. Neighbors recorded her meltdown, every word sealing her fate. His voice cut through the chaos, steady, final. You didn't protect this community, you preyed on it. She spun on him, eyes blazing. You're nothing without me, nothing. I saved you from sleeping in your car. You do what I say, or you go back to being a nobody. The cruelty in her tone made the room flinch, but stood tall. His voice shook, but his words didn't. Maybe I'd rather be nothing than your bully. The room erupted, not with applause, but with something more powerful. A collective exhale. The spell was broken. That's when the sheriff's deputies entered. Their boots thudded against the linoleum, radios crackling softly. The crowd parted as they stepped forward, eyes locked on her. Pierce, one deputy said firmly, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful intimidation. Her scream was primal. You can't do this. I am this community. Without me, you'll all be nothing, nothing. The deputies grabbed her arms, snapping cuffs around her wrists. She thrashed, spitting venom. Got what he deserved. And you... Her eyes locked on me, burning with hatred. You'll get worse if you think you can undo what I built. The threat sent a chill straight down my spine. Even in handcuffs, dragged out the door, she radiated danger. The room sat in stunned silence as the echoes of her voice faded down the hall. Mothers rocked their children. Fathers exchanged looks heavy with anger and relief. Sandra whispered, she admitted it, she really admitted it. And his hands trembling, but his shoulders lighter than I'd ever seen them, looked at me and said quietly, she's not coming back, not after this. But deep down, I knew something else. Even with gone, the scars she left on this community would take years to heal. 6 months later, the cabin felt different. Quieter, steadier. The air still carried that pine-sweet scent in the mornings, and the creek still babbled in the background, but there was a weight lifted, like the land itself was breathing again. I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, the newspaper folded on the table beside me. The headline read, "Former HOA leader sentenced in development fraud scheme. 5 years in federal prison. That's what Pierce got for conspiracy, fraud, and extortion." The investigation into Uncle's death had been reopened, though prosecutors said the evidence wasn't strong enough for murder charges. Still, her words, her meltdown, her rage, they left a shadow no court could erase. But this story was never just about her. It was about the people she hurt and the ones who chose to rise after the storm. Sandra, who once handed every scrap of financial information she asked for, now spent her weekends helping neighbors understand their rights. She sat in living rooms with stacks of mortgage papers, calmly explaining terms that used to be weapons against them. She said it was her way of making peace with her guilt. Maybe it was, but to the families she helped, it was more than that. It was freedom. His path was harder. Some neighbors couldn't forget his role as enforcer, the man who blocked driveways and barked orders. But he didn't hide from it. Every time someone asked, he admitted it plainly. "I thought I was protecting you, I was wrong." Instead of intimidation, he used his skills for good. He started checking on elderly residents at night, made sure single mothers felt safe walking from their cars, even helped repair a broken fence for the Johnsons down the road. He wasn't perfect, but every act was a step toward redemption, and people noticed. As for the community itself, something remarkable happened. Out of the ashes of fake HOA, the residents formed something real. A legitimate community association, transparent, democratic, accountable. No fake badges, no secret files, just neighbors voting, talking, and deciding together. And the land, my land, 137 acres. At first, the truth had terrified everyone. The idea that their homes sat on property they didn't own made families feel like they were standing on sand instead of stone. But I made a choice. I offered leases, fair, affordable, with a clear path to ownership if they wanted it. Because Uncle hadn't left me this land to lord over people. He'd left it to me to protect them. The developers at Riverside packed up their glossy brochures and walked away when the county rejected their project. Turns out, it's harder to bulldoze a neighborhood when the people inside it stand united. Property values didn't collapse like had threatened. In fact, they rose. Not because of intimidation or fake inspections, but because people finally knew where they stood. For the first time in years, they could plan for their futures without the shadow of some false authority looming over them. At our first official community barbecue, I watched kids race across yards that had once been lined with orange survey stakes. Neighbors shared food instead of whispered fears. Even Mrs., who'd been so shaken during that meeting, stood at the grill laughing with like none of it had ever happened. I thought about Uncle then, about the files he left, the notes he scribbled in the margins, the warnings he underlined. Must protect Brandon. He hadn't been afraid for the land. He'd been afraid for me, for what standing up to people like could cost. He'd been right, the cost was heavy, fear, anger, sleepless nights. But in the end, it wasn't just me standing, it was all of us. And that's the truth never understood. Real authority doesn't come from fear or forged documents or screaming about sacrifice. Real authority comes from service, from people choosing to trust each other, not because they're forced, but because they want to. I looked out over the land as the sun dipped low, painting the sky orange and gold. Kids, laughter carried on the wind, blending with the steady hum of cicadas. For the first time since I'd driven up that dirt driveway, I felt peace. Uncle hadn't just left me property. He'd left me a chance to choose cooperation over control, truth over manipulation, community over fear. And that's a responsibility I'll carry as long as I draw breath. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.